Canada's response to the events in Egypt has been, to say the least, an interesting one. And it is of interest to all of us to find out how our country and our government has responded to the events in Egypt. For some, it has taken them by surprise. For others, it was something that they intentionally reacted to in a way, in a manner that is not representative of what all Canadians want. To explain to us how Canada responded to the events in Egypt, I'm going to ask Dr. Nadia Abu-Zahra to address us. Thank you.
I'll begin with a quote, and you have to guess. You can raise your hands even if you want. You have to guess who gave us this quote. As Canadians, we cannot simply hope. We must help. We cannot simply applaud change. We must act. That was said on March 16th, 2011, by our Foreign Affairs Minister, Lawrence Kennan. It was a time when we dispersed and decided to disperse $11 million for the development of democratic institutions in Egypt and the Middle East. Canada stood for democracy, youth, education and women, the economy and justice. Over 83 million people in Egypt, a quarter of whom are youth and a fifth who live on less than $2 a day, were very glad to hear these words. Canada also stood for freedom, especially freedom of the press. Speaking of Canada's over $500,000 in aid, Foreign Affairs Minister Lawrence Kennan said, Canada is also committed to supporting journalists in Egypt as they prepare to play a crucial role in the upcoming elections and referendum process. When General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi took power, Canada called a spade and a coup. This was an extremely powerful message on behalf of all of us Canadians to the 83 million Egyptians who had seen their democratically elected president removed by force by a man known for his sordid history of torture and the beating to death of Egyptian youth. The same man would become associated with massacres and mass trials and mass detentions. Forbes calls General Sisi a pharaoh. The New York Times draws cartoons mocking his judiciary, and Egyptians have never seen such a reign of terror. In July of last year, Canada stood with those 83 million Egyptians, and 3 years ago, Canada supported democracy. What has happened in the last 3 years should give us even more reason to continue our support for democracy. But instead, we as Canadians have withdrawn. When we express our sympathies with the murdered and wounded in Egypt, we are religiously selective. Why? When we witness atrocities, we are silent. Why? When not only Egyptian but even Canadian journalists are taken captive, we forget our promises, our principles, and our commitments to journalists. Why? When Canadian families, women, children, and elderly fear the worst for their loved ones in solitary confinement in the world's worst prisons, Canada is immobilized. Why? We, as our MPs and ministers keep repeating, stand for stability. But security experts in Canada, the United States, and across the world, people like State Department officials, risk consultancy firms, and former diplomats repeat, these experts repeat, very serious warnings about repressing 83 million Egyptians and their hopes for freedom, democracy, and tolerance. These experts say that supporting a coup is not the route to stability. Forbes magazine writes, underwriting the slaughter of innocents will ultimately have disastrous consequences for US security. We as Canadians should take heed of these words of warning. If Canadian policy is to support stability, then what are we doing standing silent as our own citizens are in solitary confinement and all the world predicts economic and political downfall under the brutal fist of the military dictatorship? Where is the stability in 41,163 arrested, 7,000 killed, and 100,000 placed on blacklists for death or detainment? Is this stability? Are these Canadian principles? We in Canada have the power to change these things. We have the power to make this world a better place. We have the power to stand up and be proud as Canadian, as the bearers of the flag of freedom, democracy, and human rights. The longer we leave that flag crumpled on the ground, the longer we mar our own reputation and compromise our own values and principles. Let us stand together, all parties, all voters, all people, you and me, and assert Canada's position in defence of the human rights of our Canadian families and of all Egyptians, irrespective of creed, faith, gender, or age. Let us do what is in our hands to do.